So Shegumi is raising serious alarm as the US lands 2 more aircrafts yesterday in the northeast. He stated clearly that the US created this terrorism in Nigeria, and now they are coming with a fake excuse to come and fight it, only to come and steal Nigerian mineral resources. Now he pointed Nigerians, everybody in Nigeria, to a video where this particular agenda is being exposed for Nigerians to see, so that it will not be like he's the one saying it. Now watch the video. Let me not talk.
Well, the US has sent a small team of troops to Nigeria, which marks the first acknowledged presence of American forces on ground since US launched airstrikes last Christmas. According to the head of US Africa Command, the team was deployed after both countries agreed to do so, and this to counter the terrorist threat in West Africa. The size and scope of the mission, however, have not been disclosed yet.
You're scrolling through your phone, and suddenly the headlines start flooding in. US troops deployed to Nigeria. American warships strike targets in Africa. Trump warns of more military action. If you're Nigerian or anywhere in Africa, your first reaction might be, hold on, what exactly is happening? Because the version being told in Western media, that's only part of the story. On Christmas Day 2025, US warships in the Gulf of Guinea launched missile strikes into Sokoto State. Days later, the Pentagon confirmed that 200 American troops would deploy to Nigerian soil. And as you're watching this, US military advisors are already operating inside Africa's most populous nation. So this raises a serious question. Is this counterterrorism? Is this strategic positioning? Or is this the beginning of something much bigger? President Trump says the mission is about protecting Christians from extremist violence. The Nigerian government describes it as a security partnership, a joint effort to fight terrorism. Both explanations sound straightforward, but Nigeria is also one of Africa's largest oil producers. It sits on critical mineral reserves, including lithium, a resource essential for electric vehicles and battery technology. And it's the anchor of West Africa's political and economic stability. Meanwhile, the conflict in northern Nigeria has been burning for over 16 years. More than 40,000 people have died. Millions have been displaced. And the violence isn't as simple as many headlines suggest. So the real question isn't just why are US troops there? It's this. What are America's long-term strategic interests in Nigeria? What does Nigeria gain from this partnership? And in this long war, who is actually paying the highest price? Let's break it down. On October 7th, 2025, President Trump posted on Truth Social, "We will stop the Christian genocide in Nigeria." He warned that if the killings did not stop, the United States would impose what he called exceptionally strong sanctions. The message sent shockwaves through Abuja. Nigeria's government publicly pushed back, insisting the crisis was not a religious genocide, but a complex insurgency involving extremist groups, criminal networks, and long-running regional instability. Social media exploded. Analysts debated. Diplomats went quiet. Then came December 25th, Christmas Day. U.S. naval forces operating in the Gulf of Guinea launched missile strikes against what the Pentagon described as ISIS-affiliated targets in Sokoto State. In an official statement, the Department of Defense said the operation eliminated high-value terrorists allegedly planning attacks against American interests. But early reports raised serious questions. Nigerian officials indicated they had not been formally notified in advance of the strikes. If true, that would mean something extraordinary. A foreign military power conducting kinetic operations inside Africa's most populous nation, without clear public coordination. And that changes the conversation completely, because this is no longer just about terrorism, it's about sovereignty. Yes, you heard right. President Bola Tinubu finds out about American missiles hitting Nigerian soil the same way you and I did, through news reports. Imagine that, the supposed sovereignty of the largest economy in Africa, and Washington conducts airstrikes without even a phone call. Then came January 2026 when the backlash hits. Nigerian senators are furious and civil society groups are protesting. But then, quietly, something shifts. The Nigerian Ministry of Defense releases a carefully worded statement calling it a joint operation and thanking the U.S. for its support in fighting terrorism. And just 2 weeks ago, February 2026, the Pentagon announced it's deploying 200 troops to Nigeria. They say it's for training and advisory purposes, it's temporary, and that Nigeria requested it. That's the official timeline. Now let me tell you what happened behind closed doors. First question, if America is really there to fight terrorism, we need to ask, which terrorists? Because Nigeria isn't dealing with one threat. It's dealing with at least 3 distinct security crises happening at the same time. Let's start with the one everyone knows, Boko Haram. Since 2009, Boko Haram has been waging an insurgency in northeastern Nigeria. And for the past 16 years, over 40,000 people have died and millions displaced. You remember the Chibok girls kidnapped in 2014? That was Boko Haram. The group wants to establish an Islamic caliphate and has killed more Muslims than Christians in this war. But here's what most people don't know. Today, Boko Haram isn't even one group anymore. In 2016, it split. One faction stayed loyal to Abu Bakr Shekau until he blew himself up in 2021. The other faction pledged allegiance to ISIS and became the Islamic State West Africa Province, ISWAP for short. And ISWAP? They're not some ragtag militia hiding in caves. Between July 2024 and July 2025, ISWAP carried out 445 attacks and killed over 1,500 people. That makes them the most active ISIS affiliate on the planet. And they're not just attacking villages anymore. They've been systematically targeting Nigerian military bases in what they call the Burn the Camps campaign. Basically, the Nigerian military is getting overrun in their own fortified positions. But this is only in the northeast. Let's move to the northwest, which has a different problem: bandits. Now, when you hear bandits, you might think of guys on horseback stealing chickens. No, these are heavily armed criminal gangs with hundreds of fighters, sophisticated weapons, and control over entire territories. They started as conflicts between herders and farmers over land and water. But by 2025, these gangs were operating like warlords. They control gold mines in Zamfara State and use the proceeds to buy weapons. They kidnap for ransom as a business model. Between 2011 and 2020, Nigerians paid at least 18 billion naira in ransoms. And that's just what we know about. In the first half of 2025 alone, bandits and insurgents killed 2,266 people. That's more than the entire death toll of 2024. In August, they stormed a mosque in Katsina State and killed 32 worshippers during prayers. In July, they kidnapped over 100 people in a single raid in Zamfara. But here's where it gets dangerous. These bandits are now working with jihadist groups. Boko Haram is sending bomb makers and military advisors to train bandit gangs in Kaduna State, meaning that the line between crime and terrorism is disappearing. And now, the threat nobody's talking about: Lakurawa. You've probably never heard of them. Most Nigerians hadn't until late 2024. But this is the group the US actually hit on Christmas Day. Lakurawa isn't Nigerian. They came from Mali around 2016, originally hired by desperate communities in Sokoto State to protect them from bandits. And at first, they did exactly that. They drove out the bandits and communities welcomed them as saviors. But then they turned. They started imposing strict Islamic law, taxing villages, and even took hostages. They killed people for listening to music. As such, the protectors became the oppressors. Here's what makes Lakurawa different. They're sophisticated. They have fighters from Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, and Chad. They use drones for surveillance. They have satellite communication equipment, making them part of a transnational jihadi network stretching across West Africa. On February 4th, just last week, Lakurawa attacked 2 villages in Kwara State and killed 162 civilians simply because the villagers refused to implement Sharia law. 162 people in one attack, and it barely made international news. So when Trump says he's protecting Christians from genocide, ask yourself, which threat is he talking about? Because ISWAP in the Northeast has killed thousands, mostly Muslims. Bandits in the Northwest have killed thousands more, both Muslims and Christians. And Lakurawa just massacred 162 people in a Muslim-majority area. The U.S. missiles on Christmas Day hit Lakurawa camps. But according to security analysts on the ground, many of those missiles landed in empty fields. Residents reported seeing Lakurawa fighters flee hours before the strikes after spotting U.S. surveillance drones. And even if the strikes were effective, Lakurawa is not the biggest threat Nigeria faces. That's ISWAP, operating 500 kilometers away in the northeast. But guess what? The US didn't strike ISWAP. They struck the newest, smallest group in an area that happens to be mineral rich. Take note of that. This brings us to the question, is this really about terrorism, or is it about something else? Now, let's be very clear about something. Christians are being killed in Nigeria. That is an undeniable fact. But is it genocide? And is religion the real motive? Well, according to Open Doors, a Christian persecution monitoring organization, 3,100 Christians were killed in Nigeria in 2024. So Trump has a point, right? Not so fast. Here's what the data actually shows. The Armed Conflict Location and Event Data Project, ACLED, is one of the most respected conflict monitoring organizations in the world. They've been tracking every attack, every death, every incident in Nigeria since 2009. Their findings? Of 1,923 attacks on civilians in 1 year, only 50 were targeted based on religion. That's 2.6%. Out of almost 2,000 attacks, religion was the primary motive in just 50. Since 2009, about 53,000 people have been killed in targeted political violence in Nigeria, both Muslims and Christians. And here's the part that destroys the genocide narrative. The majority of victims killed by jihadist groups like Boko Haram and ISWAP are Muslims. Let me repeat that because it's important. Boko Haram and ISWAP have killed more Muslims than Christians. Why? Because these groups don't just hate Christians. They hate anyone who doesn't subscribe to their extreme interpretation of Islam. They've massacred entire Muslim villages for cooperating with the government. They've killed imams for preaching against them. And they've executed Muslim soldiers by the hundreds. When ISWAP attacks a military base and kills 50 Nigerian soldiers, most of those soldiers are Muslims from northern Nigeria. When bandits kidnap students from schools in Katsina or Zamfara, most of those students are Muslims. When Lakurawa imposes their version of Sharia and kills villagers for resisting, those villagers are Muslims. In fact, Intersociety, one of the organizations Trump's allies cite, admits that since 2009, approximately 60,000 moderate Muslims have been killed alongside 125,000 Christians. 60,000 Muslims killed by their own co-religionists for not being extreme enough. Now let's talk about the herder-farmer conflict, because this is where things get really complicated. And here's something else Trump isn't telling you. The Nigerian Catholic bishops themselves, in November 2025, issued a statement acknowledging that while Christian communities are under attack, Muslims and many other innocent citizens have also been victims of the same cruelty. They used the word genocide cautiously, saying allegations of genocide have emerged in some quarters, but they immediately added that Muslims are dying too. These are Nigerian bishops on the ground, watching their own people die, and they're still honest enough to say this isn't just about Christians. So why is Trump pushing the genocide narrative? Because it's simple, emotional, and politically powerful. Christians are being slaughtered. It's attention in a way that complex resource conflict exacerbated by climate change and state failure does not. I'm not saying Christians aren't suffering. They are. I'm not saying the violence isn't real. It is. What I'm saying is that the narrative of a systematic Muslim genocide against Christians is false. The evidence simply doesn't support it. So what is really going on? What does the U.S. want? Well, 2 days ago, February 10th, Republican lawmakers in the U.S. Congress introduced a bill with a very revealing name, the Nigeria Religious Freedom and Accountability Act of 2026. Sounds noble, right? Religious freedom. Who could be against that? But buried in that bill is a section that has nothing to do with churches or persecution. It's about Chinese mining operations. The bill explicitly calls on the U.S. Secretary of State to counter what it describes as the hostile foreign exploitation of Chinese illegal mining operations and their practice of paying protection money to Fulani militias. Think about that for a second. A bill supposedly about protecting Christians contains language targeting Chinese mining companies. Why? Because Nigeria is sitting on a fortune, and China got there first. Let me break down the numbers. Nigeria has lithium reserves worth over $34 billion. That makes it the 5th largest lithium reserve in the world. Some deposits contain up to 13% lithium oxide content. To put that in perspective, mining companies usually start exploration when they find 0.4%. Nigeria has deposits 30 times higher than that. Lithium isn't just a valuable mineral, it's the future. Every electric vehicle battery needs it. Every solar energy storage system needs it. Every smartphone, every laptop, every piece of clean energy technology depends on lithium. By 2030, 95% of lithium demand will be for batteries. And where is most of Nigeria's lithium? In the north-central states such as Nasarawa, Plateau, and Kaduna. These are exactly where the security crisis is worst, exactly where Lakurawa operates, and exactly where the U.S. fired missiles on Christmas Day. Now, who's been mining this lithium? Chinese companies. In May 2024, the Kaduna state government inaugurated a lithium processing plant in partnership with a Chinese company called Mingxin Mineral Separation. Chinese firms have been all over northern Nigeria extracting lithium and, according to U.S. lawmakers, paying armed groups for protection. A 2023 report in the Times of London claimed Chinese nationals in Nigeria's mining sector were funding terrorist groups to secure access to mineral reserves. Through bribes and illegal transactions, Beijing could be indirectly funding terror in Africa's largest economy. The new U.S. bill wants to investigate these ties and impose sanctions under the Global Magnitsky Act, such as visa bans, asset freezes, and the usual works. But here's the thing. Nigeria hasn't been fighting Chinese mining. The Nigerian government has been welcoming it. President Tinubu even made it a policy that any company wanting to mine lithium must build a processing plant in Nigeria first. That was meant to keep the value chain domestic and create jobs. So when American lawmakers suddenly care about illegal Chinese mining in Nigeria, what they're really saying is, China is winning the resource competition and we need to push them out. The United States has a long-standing strategic interest in the Gulf of Guinea. In 2005, U.S. government officials were already testifying to Congress that West Africa could supply an additional 2 to 3 million barrels per day to global markets within 5 to 10 years. American energy policy has viewed the Gulf of Guinea as critical for decades. But while America was distracted in the Middle East and focused on its own shale revolution, China moved into Africa. Chinese companies now dominate mining across the continent. They build infrastructure, offer loans, and don't ask questions about democracy or human rights. They just do business. And now the U.S. is scrambling to catch up. This is the new great game, the 21st century scramble for Africa. But instead of European colonial powers carving up the continent for rubber and ivory, it's America and China competing for lithium, cobalt, rare earth elements, and energy dominance. And Nigeria, with its combination of massive population, oil wealth, and critical minerals, is the prize. So when Trump talks about Christian genocide, he's activating American evangelical voters. When he sends troops to Nigeria, he's securing access to resources. When Congress writes bills about Chinese mining, they're not worried about Fulani herders. They're worried about Beijing controlling the supply chains for the technologies of the future. The missionaries and the humanitarian rhetoric, that's the packaging. The main product inside is geopolitical dominance. And the Nigerian government knows this. That's why, despite the public outrage over unauthorized airstrikes, Abuja quickly pivoted to calling it a joint operation. That's why they accepted U.S. troops, because Nigeria needs help securing the north, and America has the military capacity to provide it. But make no mistake, this is a transactional relationship. America isn't in Nigeria out of charity, it's there because Nigeria matters. So the big question is, can Nigeria maintain its sovereignty in the midst of this partnership? Well, the Nigerian Defense Headquarters keeps repeating the same phrase. You'll see it in every official statement. All engagements are conducted in full respect of Nigeria's sovereignty. But what does sovereignty actually mean when foreign troops are operating on your soil without your parliament's approval? When missiles land in your territory without prior notification? When you find out about military operations through CNN? Let's be clear about what happened here. The Pentagon announced U.S. troops were in Nigeria before the Nigerian government confirmed it. Think about that sequence. America told the world it had deployed forces to Nigeria, and Nigerian officials scrambled to explain it afterward. That's not partnership, that's permission granted after the fact. Then came the defense minister, Christopher Musa, who says these troops are just advisors. Vietnam, Afghanistan, and Iraq all started with advisors before it had invasion forces. And now we're learning, from exclusive reports, that the U.S. 3rd Special Forces Group has been assigned to Nigeria. This is not some desk job unit. The 3rd Special Forces Group is designed for unconventional warfare, direct action, counterinsurgency, and counterterrorism operations. They've been deployed in Afghanistan, Iraq, Mali, Ethiopia, and the Congo. These are the guys who do the things governments don't officially acknowledge. According to sources, the U.S. has also requested permission to build a refueling station for their drones in a northeastern Nigerian state. The handwriting is clear. Nigeria is about to become a permanent forward operating base for U.S. military operations in West Africa. Now contrast this with what happened in Niger just last year. In 2024, after a military coup, Niger's junta ordered the United States to leave. The U.S. had built a $110 million drone base in Agadez. Airbase 201 was the centerpiece of American counterterrorism strategy in the Sahel. It was its most expensive base, but Niger said, get out. By September 2024, every American soldier had left. Over 1,000 troops withdrawn and the drone base shut down. Niger took a massive economic hit from lost American aid, but they did it anyway. Why? Because sovereignty mattered more than money. Because the junta believed the U.S. was there to advance American interests, not Nigerian security. And now, just months after losing their Niger base, guess where the U.S. is setting up operations? Nigeria. This isn't coincidence. This is strategic repositioning. The United States lost its primary foothold in the Sahel and immediately pivoted to West Africa's largest country. Nigeria is the replacement for Niger, and unlike Niger's military government, Nigeria's civilian leadership said yes. And here's the uncomfortable truth. He's right. When AFRICOM was first proposed in 2007, African nations refused to host it. The hostility was so strong that AFRICOM's headquarters ended up in Stuttgart, Germany, because no African country wanted American troops permanently based on their soil. 18 years later, Nigeria has accepted what the entire continent rejected. Now, does this mean Nigeria shouldn't cooperate with the U.S. on security? No. Nigeria faces real threats. The military is overstretched and intelligence capabilities are weak. So technical support from a superpower could help. But the fact is that cooperation doesn't require surrendering decision-making. It doesn't require accepting foreign troops without parliamentary approval. It doesn't require finding out about airstrikes through media reports. And here's what should worry every Nigerian. Once foreign troops are in, getting them out is incredibly difficult. America doesn't build refueling stations for temporary operations. The 3rd Special Forces Group doesn't deploy for 6-month advisory missions and then leave. Look at the pattern. U.S. troops went to Somalia in 1992 for a humanitarian mission. 34 years later, they're still there. American forces entered Afghanistan in 2001 to fight Al-Qaeda. 20 years later, they were still fighting. The so-called advisors in Iraq became a full occupation force. Nigeria is walking into the same trap, and the people making these decisions won't be the ones paying the price. When American airstrikes hit the wrong target and kill Nigerian civilians, it won't be President Tinubu's family in the rubble. When drones mistake a wedding for a terrorist gathering, it won't be the defense minister's relatives mourning. So can Nigeria say no? Technically, yes. Legally, yes. Constitutionally, yes. But politically, Nigeria is between China and America, and the government is choosing America. Between sovereignty and military support, they're choosing support. And between transparency and expedience, they're choosing expedience. The question is, what happens when America's interests in Nigeria stop aligning with Nigeria's own interests? What happens when U.S. companies want access to lithium mines that Nigerian communities oppose? What happens when protecting oil infrastructure conflicts with local environmental concerns? Will Nigeria be able to say no then? Or will it be too late? What do you think? Let us know in the comments section below. Don't forget to like this video, drop a comment, and subscribe to our channel.